Like almost everyone else, I was introduced to Charlotte Bronte through Jane Eyre, her most famous novel. And I like that one very much, so I checked out Villette and I absolutely loved it. So I wanted to see what else Charlotte Bronte had written. And I found out that she had two more finished novels, The Professor and Shirley. And judging just from Goodreads reviews and book covers, I decided to give Shirley a try. Now, to be honest, I didn't expect to like it as much as I liked either Jane Eyre or Villette, because those two were absolute masterpieces. Shirley, I think, is relatively unknown compared to those two. But as I started reading the novel, I was in for a very pleasant surprise, because not only did I like it so very much, I think I loved it even more than I did Jane Eyre. This might be an unpopular opinion, but Shirley is definitely my second favourite novel from Charlotte Bronte, the first being Villette. Now, just a disclaimer, Shirley is decidedly a very different type of novel from Jane Eyre, so I don't think it's right to compare the two. Even Charlotte Bronte, right up front in the introduction, she tells us that readers, if you come here looking for stimulus and passion and an all-sweeping love story, romance and poetry, then you cannot be more mistaken. This is a completely different type of novel. This is a cold, hard tale, and indeed that is what Shirley is, and that's what makes it so very different from other things that I read from Charlotte Bronte. So the novel is set in England in 1811 or 1812, during the time when England was in war with France, and you could feel the tension of that period pervading all throughout the novel. Everybody was on edge, everyone had their own political opinion about what was going on in the world. Some people wanted the war to go on, some people wanted it to stop. More importantly, trade had come to a halt, and commerce with the US also stopped because of an order from the Council of Trade or something like that, and the manufacturers and the mill owners and the factory owners were not able to make profit from their trade, and the situation was even worse for the working people, who could not find jobs, could not make enough money to cover their basic needs like food and shelter. And at that time also machines were being introduced into the mills and into the factories, and this added to the hostility and the negative feelings between the working people and the mill owners and the manufacturers, because the working people felt that they were being excluded by those new machines. And there was always this fear of a revolution, fear of vandalism or violence breaking out at any moment. And indeed there is even, there are a couple of cases where we see the working people just not being able to take it anymore and destroying machines. Even there is a scene where there's a battle between about 100 people from each side, and they're shooting at each other, and it was quite a surprise to read that in a Charlotte Bronte novel. I didn't expect it at all. Yeah, but what is very interesting in this is that we get to hear both sides of the story. You get to develop compassion for both classes. It's not the relatively straightforward story of people who are vandalizing things and breaking machines and they need to be stopped. And it's not the other side of the coin. It's not just merely that, okay, the working people, they need food, they need money, so of course they're gonna rebel and start a revolution against the mill owners and the manufacturers. The argument is much more nuanced than this. And when you hear it from the sides of both classes, within the broader context of the war and the economic depression or the industrial depression, it's very, very edifying, for the lack of a better word. And indeed, one of the main characters who was very much involved in all of this does go through an edifying process. In the beginning, he was very determined, he wanted to reestablish the wealth of his family, and he was so hard set to get those machines working and to profit as much as he can from the trade without incurring the extra costs of hiring people and so on. And this was the exterior. At the same time, we heard or we saw the inner struggle of the more humane part of him, just wanting to help those people, but at the same time seeing how it was necessary for him just to put himself and be selfish in order to prosper first. And as he goes through this journey and meet different types of people and hear different opinions and so on, he does go through an edifying process. It's not the perfect character arc where he is in the end redeemed and he just sacrifices everything for the working people and so on, but it's, again, as I said, the whole argument is much more nuanced than this. Now, the other theme that was going on through the work was the woman question. In Victorian England, or at least in 1811 or 1812, women were supposed to be inferior to men. They were expected to be obedient, not to have their own separate lives, separate from being just a daughter or a wife or a mother. And in Shirley is definitely a feminist work through and through. I think it's one of the most feminist works that I have read from the Victorian era. And all of that, I think, goes back to the character of Shirley and who she is. But not only that, there are two main characters in Shirley. Maybe I should have started with that. Two main characters, Caroline Helstone and Shirley Keeldar. And those two characters are very different from each other. Caroline is a more submissive, docile, unspoken, and soft kind of girl, whereas Shirley is very headstrong, very independent. She sets her mind to do something and she does it no matter what. And in both characters we see different kinds of criticisms against the social order or the injustice towards women that was prevalent at that time. In Caroline, it's in her musings and the way she thinks about the world, and that we feel a very poignant kind of criticism. We feel the injustice most with Caroline. I think there was this scene with her love interest. She was saying that, had I been a man, I could have said this. Had I been a man, I could have done that. There were so many solutions to her problem, but because she was a woman, she couldn't do any of them. She just had to shut up and endure whatever she was going through in silence. And you feel that, it gets to you. And you feel that it's just unfair. At one moment in the story, she wants to get a job. She wants to have something that would give more meaning to her life than simply falling in love and looking for a husband and having children and so on. But again, because she is a woman, she couldn't find that she could do that without the approval of her uncle. She's an orphan and her uncle is her guardian, so she needed the approval of her uncle, and of course he didn't approve. So, in her musings about work and how much meaning it would give to her life and her inability to do that, again, you feel that poignant injustice. And even though I said Caroline is a bit docile and submissive, it doesn't mean that she's completely incapable of taking action. And definitely we see in a couple of scenes flashes of this capability. We see that she has the potential to realize herself and to achieve great things if only society would let her. But again, her submissiveness and docility stop her from defying the order of the society or the structures of society any further. And here comes in Shirley. As I said, Shirley is a very different type of character. In her thoughts and philosophies and so on, she's similar, quite similar to Caroline, but in a more outspoken, more courageous and just more independent way. And perhaps her wealth helps her to be that. She is in possession of a large house and a large fortune, and at times she even calls herself Captain Keeldar instead of just Shirley, just to give that, to convince people that she's not just a woman who will be bossed around and so on. No, she is like a master of her own fate. When she decides to do something, she does it no matter what. And there was one very particularly powerful scene. Whenever I say Shirley is a very feminist work, I just remember that passage. Her uncle wanted her to marry someone whom she didn't love and wasn't convinced that she should marry. And first she's very respectful towards him. She tries to answer his questions and just convince him that this person is not the right person for her. But her uncle keeps pressing on and on, so she becomes playful and she teases him. And then her uncle just keeps, he expects her to, in the end, to submit, like perhaps other women that he was used to. And so he pushes things a bit further and becomes almost insulting towards her. And here she just breaks out against him. The way she lashes out against him was definitely spectacular. She calls out his hypocrisy. She calls out all the flaws in the way he thinks about the world. She just shows herself to be a greater philosopher and a greater thinker and a greater, again, captain of her soul than any man would be. And the language she uses is so strong and so powerful that at the end her uncle says, okay, you're a very dangerous woman. My daughters are not associating with you anymore and we're leaving the house tomorrow. I have never heard such language. I have never been addressed in this way. Your ideas are dangerous. The way you think is completely strange. And that's how powerful it was. And I think Shirley as a character must have been quite inspirational for many young ladies back then, and definitely quite scary for people who did not want to oppose the status quo. Now, set against these two broader themes of the women question and the economic depression and the struggle between the mill owners and the working people, we have the intermingling love stories of the four main characters: Caroline and Shirley, whom we've already mentioned, and Robert and Lewis Moore, two brothers. One of them is a Malona and the other is a tutor. But the interesting thing is that we don't spend all the time with only those four characters. And Shirley, you meet a huge number of characters. They contribute to the story. They are there very much. We have Mr. York, his wife, their 5 children, and we even get to hear glimpses or read glimpses about the future of some of those children. There is Shirley's uncle, as I mentioned, and his family. There are suitors to Shirley. There is her governess. There are different families, both rich and poor, from the neighborhood. And perhaps most importantly, there are 3 rectors of the 3 neighboring towns and the 3 curates. And it's with those that the story opens, with the 3 curates. We don't even meet the main characters. I think Caroline, we meet her in the 2nd or 3rd chapter, maybe even after that. Shirley, we don't. She doesn't come up. She doesn't appear until we are 40% or 30% at least into the novel. And Lewis Moore, I think, is my favorite character. We don't see him like all the way until approaching the end of the novel, or at least like in the second half of the novel. So I think this is one of the things that makes it so very different from Jane Eyre. In Jane Eyre, we start with Jane Eyre in her childhood, and we stick with her as she grows up into adolescence and then into her early 20s, and then we follow her adventures. Here we come into a world that is already established. Caroline is already 18 years old when we start the novel. Shirley, when we meet her, she's I think 21 or 22. And the novel starts with the 3 curates sitting, I think, in an inn or somewhere, and they were being being themselves, their lousy selves. They're being rude, they're being loud, they're just eating and drinking and fighting over no one knows what. And then the rector comes in and he chides them a bit, and then he asks one of them to go and guard a mill with someone else, because there was a fear of some working people, or rebels as they were being called at the time, of intercepting new machines and destroying them and so on. And it's into that world that we enter, and much later on we meet Caroline. And we know that Shirley, she's the eponymous character. The novel is titled Shirley, so we know that Shirley must be appearing somewhere in the novel, but she doesn't do so until much later. So, I mean, I think because of that, in addition to the fact that, unlike the other novels from Charlotte Bronte, where she uses the first-person narration, here we have an omniscient narrator, third-person narrator. So all of these things combined, we do not develop as much empathy towards either Caroline or Shirley as much as we do towards Lucy Snow in Villette, for example, or Jane Eyre. And I think this is what makes the novel quite different from the others. So instead of going on a journey of identification with one person, it's a story of a whole town, like all the people in Briarfield, which is the town where the most of the events are taking place. You get into that world and you think of each character, even the main characters, in this broader context of the time, and you feel like the bearing of the whole period of England at that time at every moment. So it's more of a social novel. It's more of a social commentary on the times. So instead of this aura of romance and poetry and passion, as Charlotte Bronte says in the beginning of the novel, and even instead of that Gothic element that we see very evident in both Villette and Jane Eyre, here we have this industrial dissatisfaction, the tension, the war, the economic depression, the injustice done towards women, even though it's very obvious, this one in Villette and Jane Eyre, but I think here it's even more pronounced, it's dealt with more directly. And the setting, the tone, all of that, it's very different. Now, definitely the language is definitely the language of Charlotte Bronte. The way she describes nature, the way she relates events, all of that is definitely Charlotte Bronte's language. And even the characterization is definitely Charlotte Bronte. Now, one thing that I absolutely love about the way Charlotte Bronte writes is that how she sometimes can get to the essence of who a person is in just one incident or just in a few words. And this happens with the curates. There was one scene where they were visiting Shirley, and Shirley had this big dog, and even though it was harmless, it looked scary. And the way 2 of those 3 curates reacted to the dog incident and how they behaved afterwards, it tells you so much about who they are, just in that brief incident, and how each of them just react afterwards. It was so fun to read and so insightful. There is a similar incident with one of the rectors, Dr. Bowlby, and we don't hear much about him, but there was one incident where I think there was a feast or something, and he was sitting with some girls around him, and he was chatting and gossiping and so on, and people like Dr. Bowlby, they wouldn't notice, they wouldn't even acknowledge the existence of someone like Caroline. But still, she was playing hostess, and she was giving him or offering him some food. And there is this one brief sentence that says, Dr. Bowlby did not see Caroline, but the macaroons he did see. And I mean, that's a lot. It's so fun to read, and it just tells you about what kind of person Dr. Bowlby is. You just imagine him sitting there with girls around him, just gossiping and talking, and someone is offering him food, but he doesn't see the person, he just sees the food. Yeah. Now, I said at the beginning of this video that Villette is still my favorite novel from Charlotte Bronte, because I think, stylistically speaking and as a literary achievement, Villette is superior to Shirley. And even in terms of enjoyment of reading, I think I enjoyed reading Villette a little bit more than I did Shirley. And Shirley, I mean, it started out, I was disoriented because I was not expecting this kind of events and scenes from Charlotte Bronte, again, having only read Jane Eyre and Villette. So at first I was a bit disoriented, and then I got used to it, and things were going really well. I was really enjoying it. But halfway through the novel, things just started to drag on a bit, or maybe I felt that they started to drag on a bit. Reading it became a bit laborious, just a little bit. And then around 75% or 80% through the book, things become spectacular again. The ending is amazing, it's excellent. So just because of that, in the middle, I think, yeah, and as I said, Villette is just, it had more human depth to it. It was a bit more subtle, which I like more. And just generally speaking, I think I enjoyed reading it more than I did Shirley. There are a couple of things as well that I didn't like in Shirley. Not that I didn't like, but I think that they took away from the reading experience. One of those is the character of Shirley, which is, as I said, it's phenomenal. But at the same time, in just a few moments, she seemed a bit too strong for the time. I had a hard time believing that such a woman could exist in 1811 or 1812, who could be so outspoken and so rebellious against the social order. She seemed more like a model than a real character. That's why I think she seemed a bit unrealistic. At points I wondered, like, what is her flaw? If we had Shirley even in modern times, she would seem like a very headstrong woman and a very capable woman, and even in modern standards. So how could such a person exist back in 1811 or 1812? Again, at other times, maybe this is because of the empathy thing. We spend quite a lot of time away from Shirley, just hearing about what she's doing. We don't spend so much time in her heart and in her mind, maybe to know the what is going on inside, the struggles that are going on. So maybe that could be attributed to that. But yeah, and at other moments, you don't feel that at all. You feel that Shirley is a very much flesh and blood human being. So that's one thing. The other thing is that towards the end, I think the last 6 or 7 chapters, the majority of them are told through Lewis Moore writing in his diary. So he's recording what had happened and we're reading that, which is fine. I mean, some novels are written completely in this way, others are written in letter forms and so on. But what seems strange, and what always seems strange in these things, is that you don't record full conversations going on for pages on end, word for word. Nobody does that in his diaries. So reading it as someone who is writing that in his diary, it just seemed somewhat strange. But you know, I'm just nitpicking, I guess. I know a lot of people do it, a lot of authors do it, so it's fine. And it did allow for one very cozy moment. At one point, Lewis Moore enters a room, he sits down, takes out his diary and his pen, and he starts writing, and the narrator says, "Okay, reader, come on, you're invited to step over his shoulder and take a look at what he's writing." And even though, I mean, Charlotte Bronte is famous for addressing the reader this way, but I found the moment quite cozy. I felt myself like there in that big mansion, in that room, just literally stepping over quite stealthily to take a look at what he's writing. I enjoyed it. Yeah, and the ending, the literal ending, the last 2 sentences of the book will also, she says, the narrator says that now the tale is told and the reader must be looking for his spectacle in order to start looking for the moral of the story. But she would not condescend and insult the sagacity of the reader by telling him or her what the story is about. When you read that sentence, having gone through all the experiences that you have gone through reading the novel, and it is a very, very, very long novel, and after all the people that you've met, after all the experiences that you've gone through, all the places that you've been, all the issues that you're worried about, and all the different plot strands and the character struggles that you followed, when you read that sentence, it's just like, wow, it was amazing, it was overwhelming. It's one of those books, I mean, I know a lot of books like those, but this is one of the most powerful books where after you finish it, you just have to sit staring at a wall for 30 minutes or even a full hour, just like wondering about the book, the characters, how you're gonna spend your life now that you've finished reading it. It's one of those amazing experiences. Yeah. So I definitely recommend it. If you have not read Shirley yet, do give it a try. Just one caution though, don't go to it expecting a similar thing to Jane Eyre or Villette, because as I was reading reviews, I found a lot of people who just gave up in the first 3 or 4 chapters because it seemed very, very strange. Like, why should I care about the Q rates and the rectors and what's going on? Now, if you do care about this stuff, then great, because as I said, it's amazing, it's very insightful, and the argument, the nuance, it's about the industrial depression that was going on and the struggle between the classes. It's very, very great to read. But if you don't care about that and you want to get to the love stories and like what's typical of Charlotte Bronte, the workings of the heart and getting into the mind of characters and so on, just wait until Caroline and Robert start to have their own experiences in relation to one another, and definitely wait until Shirley appears, and I assure you that it will be worth it. And if you have already read Shirley, then what did you think about it? Did you enjoy it as much as I did? Did you think that it was better than Jane Eyre? I'm sorry for saying that. Or what? Just tell me in the comments what you think about it, what you liked, what you disliked about it. Now, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It does help with the algorithm, and as you can see, I'm just starting out this channel and I do need all the support that I can get. So if you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, turn on the bell so you don't miss a thing, and cheers.